Good evening. We have Convocation each fall to mark the official start of school. It's a time for us to come together and officially celebrate a new beginning. As we launch our 177th year as a school this evening, we participate in one of the many traditions and annual rites of passage that comprise the long and notable history of this school. Most of you know that Williston Northampton School takes its name from two schools that merged in 1971. For boys, Williston Academy, and up the road, Northampton School for Girls. At NSFG, it was customary to ring a bell called the Angelus every day to inspire reflection and quiet thought. To this day, we ring the bell on special occasions to commemorate our history and to serve that history to the present moment. The tolling of bells has traditionally been used to alert villagers to danger or important news, to call community to worship, and to mark life's passages. Its sound brings us to attention and inspires mindfulness. I would ask that you take the opportunity today, when you hear the tolling of the bell, to remember to be kind to yourself, to be kind to others, and express gratitude for what's good in your life. It's also time to keep in your thoughts those suffering in the world. We will now sound the Angelus, and I invite you to join me in a few moments of quiet thought. Thank you.
Welcome students, faculty, and staff, and honored guests to Williston's Convocation ceremony. A special thanks to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Beverly Tatum, who has come to us all the way today from Atlanta and about whom I will say more later. For students newest to our community, Convocation marks the formal start of the 177th year, and for the class of 2018, just as Mr. Korakowski said, enjoy every moment of many lasts, since this will be your final Williston Convocation. As you noticed, one of the formalities of this event is that your teachers process first according to seniority of their appointment to the school. By now, all of you, from the class of 2018 to the class of 2023, have had 1 week to experience the brilliance and passion of Williston's faculty. So please join me in recognizing them for all they do. Just last Sunday, all of you were seated by class in your colored t-shirts, about to begin a fun afternoon of orientation. You might remember that I asked you to consider the idea of courage as the key to unlocking a mindset that allows for other perspectives or gives you the confidence to make a new friend or causes you to sign up for one of Mr. Berlanga's singing groups. You might also recall how I quoted the author and poet Maya Angelou, who said that we all have empathy within us, but we don't all have the courage to use it. 1 week into your Williston journey, you may have already witnessed or taken an act of courage, big or small. You may also have discovered something about a new or old friend, some experience of theirs that brought forth this critical virtue. I guarantee that there are people all around you who exhibit this trait. All you need to do is get to know them at a deeper level. For me, that's easy, since I have a heroic model of courage in Mrs. Hill, who has displayed personal courage since the first day I met her. You see, she survived a brain tumor surgery when she was 23 years old, breast cancer surgery more recently, and other setbacks that could easily derail one's life. I asked her permission to share this family information since I wanted to make my point personally and emphatically. You simply do not know a person's backstory until friendships are built upon foundations of trust and honesty. The 2 recent hurricanes that devastated parts of Florida and Texas made me think further about this virtue called courage that seems to be preoccupying my thoughts, I admit that. Reading about how ordinary people behave under duress made me think of the opening line of Charles Dickens' famous 19th century novel, A Tale of Two Cities. Certainly, this is one of the most recognizable first lines in all of literature. It goes like this: "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness." And I have a bet here that I'm going to add right into my talk, which is that there's somebody behind me right now, a teacher, who's just finished reading A Tale of Two Cities, and the first student to come to me and get that right, breakfast is on me at Tandem. So that's the bet. Through all of the apocalyptic flooding, wood-splintering winds, and torrential rains of these hurricanes, there were acts of courage on display. One network told the story of a man who was about to purchase the last generator available at Home Depot. And he saw a woman standing in tears next to the sold-out shelves. He gave the generator to her since she had a sick relative at home whose respirator depended upon electrical power. 1 week later, just yesterday as the recovery continues, a CNN reporter told about a man who had rescued 85 people in his John boat, and he said he was not going to stop until the floods had subsided. And as an aside, major storms and hurricanes and cyclones and things like that around the world disproportionately affect those with the least amount of resources, the poorest people. These acts of courage make me optimistic for our country's future. And yet, we have also been roiled by conflagrations and inundations of our own making. It is impossible to ignore what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia earlier in August, since it cuts to the very core of our sense of humanity, morality, and human decency. All of us, privileged enough to be in this beautiful setting, at this generous school, at this moment in history, have a responsibility to stay informed, to become knowledgeable, and to act with moral and intellectual courage. And by the way, don't mistake what I'm saying about courage for foolishness. We know executive functioning in your brain doesn't get fully formed until you guys are in your 20s, so I have to sound a cautionary note. Aristotle teaches us that there's a mean, a sweet spot between extremes. Think of it this way. The person whose courageous impulse has no boundaries can be seen as foolish and could wind up dead. If you run into a burning building to rescue a neighbor's pet and come out alive, that's one thing. If you and the dog both die in the fire, that's another. Don't be like the guy last summer who took a selfie while fake kissing a rattlesnake and almost died from the bite that he sustained on his tongue. That's not a display of courage, that's just stupid. You will begin to figure out all of this at Williston. It will be one of the most important lessons you learn. The fortunate thing is that you are surrounded by the resources to become the best you can be, and one of those resources is your esteemed president of the Student Council and senior class president, Annabelle Farnham. Annabelle?
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Students, faculty, staff, class of 2018. Welcome to Convocation. I was terrified. Excited, but terrified. No, I'm not talking about when I sat down to write this speech. I'm talking about when I was first accepted to Williston the spring before freshman year. I was afraid that I wouldn't dress the right way, that I wouldn't be smart enough, that I would fail in athletics, that I wouldn't know how to be preppy. And before the year had even started, I somehow already felt behind. Luckily, that summer, I met one girl from Williston that would change all of that. A rising senior at the time, Ashley Fitch was captain of both the girls cross country and girls swimming and diving teams. I knew her from a distance, since we swam for the same rec team, but I had no idea who she was until she came up to me and introduced herself at a meet. Ashley told me how excited she was that I was coming to Williston, and before I knew it, she had set up a captain's run on which I could meet girls from the cross country team. Many of those girls became my first friends here, and are still people I'm close with today. Without hesitation, Ashley welcomed me onto campus before the year had even started, and by the first day of classes, I felt perfectly comfortable at Williston. 2 months earlier, I hadn't known anyone. Now, I had a team of girls I admired, and an inspiring captain that I could go to if I ever needed support. For the rest of the year, and even after she graduated, Ashley was a leader and a role model to me. During your time here on campus, you may hear this community referred to as the Williston bubble. Within this bubble, you not only have resources such as your surface, a diverse library, a variety of fields to practice on, and an impressive theater space, but you also have people such as your coaches, teachers, and peers to help you reach whatever success you are seeking. And I'm sure that many of you already have an idea of what you want those successes to be. We all have goals for this year. Maybe you're looking to finally figure out what's happening in math class, or to score more goals in the soccer field this season than any past year, or to land a lead part in the school musical, or to stop spending so much money on tandem. Not only are we privileged to be able to set these goals, but it's exciting that we have the opportunity to dream them in the first place. But as we take advantage of all the privileges we have while we attend Williston, please do not forget the great quote of Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. While we are expected to earn good grades, impressive scores, and standing ovations, it is easy to fall into a routine and forget that our role in the Williston bubble is only one part of our larger role. In a world plagued with conflict, division, and a sense of otherness, it is important to redefine our idea of personal success. We are more than just a list of accomplishments or failures. So the challenge is this. While you are focusing on becoming the next Van Gogh, training for another sports season, finding the perfect college, do not forget to make connections with the people around you. We live in a diverse community of students and faculty who have come to Williston from all over the world. Look around you. Everyone here has something to teach and share about something outside of Williston that has shaped them into who they are today. And each of us has our own experiences, stories, and empathy to give in return. Because when you leave this community, which of your high school successes will you remember? The grade you got in your A-push paper and the game you are so nervous for now may fade compared to the stories, the perspectives, and the values that we learned from the people around us, and the memories that we made doing the things we love with the people we love. In the words of South African-born poet Ian Thomas, and every day the world will drag you by the hand yelling, this is important, and this is important, and this is important. You need to worry about this, and this, and this. And each day it's up to you to yank your hand back, put it on your heart, and say, no, this is what's important. What has made my time up to this point on Williston's campus so special has not been the academic achievements that I've made or the athletic wins that I've had, but the people that I've been able to experience them with. It's been the people like Ashley that have made me feel so welcome, the teachers and coaches that have made me feel so capable, and the friends and family that have taught me to value the things that I cannot see, hold, or touch. Don't be afraid this year to take advantage of the things that will not only look good on paper, like awards or grades, but also the types of people here who will show you what they are passionate about. And do not be afraid to redefine your idea of success and focus on the kind of person you wish to be. Be kind, be funny, listen to new perspectives, treat people with respect, recognize your privilege, be grateful for what you have, and whether this is just the beginning, whether you're at the end, or whether you're somewhere in the middle of your time here in the beloved bubble, remember, this is what's important.
Good evening. I'm Mr. Valine, the Dean of Faculty. As I mentioned in our school assembly this morning, Williston is fortunate to have generous alums and friends of the school who have established endowed chairs to recognize and celebrate the truly exceptional work of our teaching faculty. Faculty are selected to hold these chairs for a period of 5 years, during which time they are provided monies for professional development. It's my special privilege tonight to award the Richard C. Gregory Faculty Chair, established in 2012. The new recipient of the Gregory Chair arrived on our campus in the fall of 2001. As an independent school graduate who had also taught for 3 years in boarding schools before coming to Williston, she rapidly immersed herself in all areas of school life. In the classroom, her energy, enthusiasm, and exceptional organization allow her to successfully transmit her passion for history and teaching. She brings history alive through her student-centered pedagogy. She encourages students to find their own voice through discussions and to challenge their understandings through debate. She asks probing questions about historical issues and creates engaging projects that require her students to adopt the role of discoverers and historians. She uses clearly articulated goals and objectives that assist the process of discovery. And then she prods her students to apply the knowledge and skills that they have gained. Her students feel well supported by her frequent and constructive feedback, her availability for extra help, and the positive reinforcement and praise they receive for a job well done. While she's purposeful and professional in her pursuit of learning, her students also appreciate her spirited personality and her efforts to make learning fun. She varies her teaching activities, conducts role plays of historical figures and events, embeds music videos in her lessons, and teaches art and history through Sister Wendy video clips. As one student recently commented, AP Euro is a course that's very challenging, but her energy and sense of humor make it super entertaining. She's a dedicated educator who wrote on a self-evaluation that teaching is a learning process, and I am constantly learning how to perfect my craft from my students and colleagues. She's also grown through her willingness to stretch herself by teaching new courses, acquiring an advanced degree, and embracing new roles, as she did recently when she became head of the History and Global Studies Department. Like her students, the department members benefit from her strong organizational skills, her passion and zeal for a cause, and her determination to realize established goals. As she works diligently in support of the school, all of her colleagues have come to expect and respect her collegiality, her expertise, and her brutal honesty. Outside the classroom, she served as a longtime dorm parent, a caring advisor, a winter fitness supervisor, and a field hockey coach. In all these endeavors, she brings a commitment to excellence and a positive outlook. She's also been an advocate for inclusion in both our curriculum and our community. For several years, she served as the multicultural coordinator for Williston and helped raise awareness of diversity on our campus. A legacy that she's particularly proud of is the addition of a Women in Gender Studies course to our academic program. The Gregory recipient is an alum of NMH. She was an intern at Miss Hall's and started teaching at Stoneleigh Burnham. So it took her a while to get it right and find the proper place in the Pioneer Valley to hone her craft. Now, 16 years later, she's found a home at Williston, and through her substantial contributions to the life of the school, she's made an indelible mark on our community. It gives me great pleasure to present the Richard C. Gregory Faculty Chair to Sarah Klump.
It has been our tradition at Convocation to honor teachers who have committed 25 years of their lives to Williston by presenting them with a Williston chair with a plaque. This year we have two recipients. Jen Fulcher began her career at Williston back in 1989 when she was a psychology teacher, civics teacher, dorm parent, coach. Her career here was briefly interrupted by a stint coaching women's soccer at Middlebury College, only to return to Williston after a handful of years. Currently, she serves as the director of the middle school and is well known for her phenomenal record as the varsity coach of girls lacrosse and soccer. Ms. Fulcher is, as everyone knows and will agree, a Coca-Cola fueled force of unparalleled energy, and I know she's always been this way, since I did a little digging before writing these remarks, and apparently it's always been true. With that boundless energy comes an equal focus on student achievement, on her students and players being better every day, whether playing on the fields or learning in our classrooms. If anyone doubts her competitiveness, then just watch Ms. Fulcher in the middle school volleyball tournament. Jen, if you ever run for Congress, you have a ready-made slogan. Thanks for setting the bar so high and for all you have done for Williston. Allison Marsland has been an admission officer at Williston for 25 years and currently serves as Director of Middle School Admission and Senior Associate Director of Admission. So she and Ms. Fulcher are joined at the hip when it comes to our 7th and 8th grade students. Moreover, every student who joined Williston as a 9th grader also knows Ms. Marland as co-founder and director of the 9th grade core program. And if you remember your first day at Williston, you will recall Ms. Marsland moving among the pews of the chapel, taking pictures of everyone smiling. She even invented the selfie before that was a thing. Ms. Marland's insistence that smiling makes you feel better and invites others to engage you forms the basis of friendship and community. Those who have seen Ms. Marsland in action, whether coaching softball or heading 194 Main Street, know that she practices what she preaches. Allison, please accept our thanks for your 25 years of community building and modeling Williston's mission. Dr. Beverly Tatum is no stranger to the Pioneer Valley or to Williston. The parent of 2 sons, both graduates of Williston, Dr. Tatum is one of our nation's foremost experts on race relations and leaders in higher education. After serving as the president of Mount Holyoke College, she went on to a formidable career as president of Spelman College, which she led from 2002 until 2015. She holds an undergraduate degree from Wesleyan University and a master's and PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Michigan. I first became aware of this seminal scholar from her best-selling book on the psychology of racism titled "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" which was a must-read for teachers when it was published 20 years ago. It has just been re-released, and Dr. Tatum is on a timely book tour helping to make sense of the racial climate in the country today. Dr. Tatum has many other books and numerous awards and accomplishments, too many for me to enumerate today. But suffice it to say, we are honored and fortunate to have a person of such stature open our school year at Williston. Please join me in welcoming President Tatum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hill, for that lovely introduction, and I want to add my congratulations to the faculty and staff who have been honored here today, and of course to all of you, welcoming you back, and a special congratulations to the seniors who are getting ready to start their final year here at Williston. I want to thank our STA speaker for the wonderful speech, and the remarks that have been made, I have to say, dovetail very nicely with what I've planned to say today. I wanted to begin by telling you that the title of my talk is The Importance of Perspective and Learning the History We Don't Know. So I thought it was especially symbolically significant that one of the faculty members honored today is a historian. And also that the opening reflection had to do with the bell, because my speech starts with a story of a bell. And it begins in this way. A long time ago, I read a disturbing story that had a powerful effect on me, and I want to begin my talk by telling it to all of you. Unfortunately, I don't remember where I first read it, but I believe it comes from the Buddhist tradition. It's a story about a king who wanted to create a large bell that could be heard across the countryside, one that would be astonishingly beautiful in tone. He commissioned the most highly skilled bell maker he could find, and the bell maker worked diligently to produce a wonderful bell. The first bell he made was good, but not great. The sound quality just wasn't what the king was looking for. So a second bell was made,
And still, despite the bell maker's best efforts, it wasn't good enough for the king. Finally, in frustration, the bell maker told the king that the only way to get the beautiful tone he was looking for would be to sacrifice a young maiden in the casting of the bell. And so the king ordered his soldiers to find a suitable candidate. In a nearby village, they found a poor woman with a young daughter and snatched her away from her pleading mother. She was sadly sacrificed for the bell, and indeed the bell that resulted was beautiful to see and had an astonishingly pure and lovely tone. All who heard it marveled at the sound, but the poor mother who knew firsthand its terrible history cried with grief each time the bell rang. There was injustice literally baked into that bell, and those who did not know that history never had to think about that injustice. They simply enjoyed its sound. When I first encountered that story, it caused me to think about what metaphorical bells are ringing today whose sound I enjoy, but whose continued ringing is, for someone else, a reminder of terrible injustice. Your perspective or point of view about the value of the bell and its sweet sound is certainly going to be shaped by your knowledge or lack of knowledge about its history. Sometimes we prefer not to know such history. If we knew, what would we do? What would be our obligation? Would we stop listening to the bell? Would we condemn the king and try to overthrow his rule? What if the king is long gone? Can we just forget about the price that was paid? Would we demand reparations for the poor mother whose daughter was sacrificed? Or would we shrug our shoulders and say, I didn't order that bell. It's not my fault. It's not my responsibility. How you respond to that question, your perspective, is likely to be rooted in your own life experience and may not reflect the life experiences of others. Whose perspective might be missing? Whose history don't we know? These might seem like theoretical questions, but in fact, they have real implications for what is going on around us today. If we extend the metaphor of the beautiful bell to the United States, we must acknowledge that there is injustice baked into our bell. Jim Wallace, a well-known pastor and publisher of Sojourners magazine, writes from his perspective as a white European-American man about this embedded flaw in a book entitled America's Original Sin: Racism, White Privilege, and the Bridge to a New America. In it, he writes the following quote, "The United States has the most racial diversity of any country in the world. This diversity is essential to our greatness, but it has also given us a history of tension and conflict. Ironically and tragically, American diversity began with acts of violent racial oppression that I am calling America's original sin: the theft of land from indigenous people who were either killed or removed, and the enslavement of millions of Africans who became America's greatest economic resource in building a new nation. The theft of land and the violent exploitation of labor were embedded in America's origins." End quote. The injustice was baked in, and a racial hierarchy created that we still see evidence of today. All of that is part of our American bell. And when we hear the bell song, the national anthem, or recite its pledge, some, particularly those at the top of the hierarchy, may hear a beautiful sound, while others, particularly those identified with the people at the bottom, feel the pain of past and present injustice. What Mr. Hill didn't mention in his introduction was that I was scheduled to be here for Convocation last year, and unfortunately I had a death in my family and wasn't able to come. But when I was working on this speech that you're hearing today, it was the fall of 2016, and I was thinking about the controversy surrounding Colin Kaepernick's decision not to stand for the national anthem as a silent protest. He was using his sphere of influence as a sports figure to remind us of the injustice baked into the bell, injustice that still has not been completely purged from the bell's core, and that is still resonating from the bell today. I thought when I responded to Mr. Hill's invitation to come this year, I'd need to write a new speech because who'd be talking about Colin Kaepernick now? Well, a year later, the Kaepernick controversy has not gone away. And in fact, it has been added to by the NFL teams refusing to hire him and others threatening to boycott the NFL because of that. But also a year later, we could expand our discussion to include other symbols and what they represent. We could talk about the differing responses to Confederate flags and statues, for example. What do you hear when you hear the national anthem or recite the Pledge of Allegiance? What do you see when you spot a Confederate flag or a statue of Confederate soldiers? Recently, I came across an essay by Tom Ziller, a sports writer who captured two different perspectives, that of Colin Kaepernick and of another football player, Saints quarterback Drew Brees, who criticized Colin for his silent protest. Tom Ziller, the sports writer, wrote, "Brees hears the anthem and sees his World War II veteran grandfather and the dozens of soldiers he's met through his involvement with the USO. Kaepernick hears the anthem and sees Philando Castile, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner. These are not mutually exclusive visions. America can be worthy of pride and worthy of disgust. Even World War II provided lessons to this effect. While American soldiers liberated Europe, 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent were rounded up and incarcerated by our government. America can be worthy of pride and worthy of disgust. The examples from our slave-owning founding fathers to the century of Jim Crow laws that followed emancipation are endless," end quote. As Ziller pointed out, both perspectives are valid, but I would argue that the first perspective he mentioned is based on an incomplete history, even of veterans and their World War II experience. After World War II, the veterans of that war received several major benefits under the GI Bill, providing funding for education, job training, and home loan guarantees, a major factor in the growth of the middle class in America in the 1950s. Yet, during the same period, thousands of black veterans in both North and South were denied housing and business loans, as well as admission to whites-only colleges and universities. To give you a sense of the degree of discrimination, of the 67,000 mortgages insured by the GI Bill in New York and northern New Jersey, less than 100 of them went to support home purchases by veterans of color. When we don't acknowledge this aspect of our history, we fail to acknowledge the pain that was and is still being baked into the bill. Similarly, people with different life experiences hear different meanings when they hear protesters chant the phrase, "Black Lives Matter," a rallying cry that began as a hashtag on Twitter in response to the police shootings of unarmed black men and women. I gave a talk last summer and an elderly white gentleman told me during the Q&A why he objected to the phrase. He said he felt excluded by it. When you hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, does it sound like only Black Lives Matter, or does it sound like Black Lives Matter too? To me, it is obvious that the phrase highlights the ways that Black lives have been devaluated historically and currently, not just because police officers have been able to kill unarmed people without accountability, but because the health of Black citizens, both children and adults, can be disregarded when water, known to be contaminated with lead, was allowed to flow from their faucets for months without taking action. Meanwhile, Flint city offices were being provided bottled water to drink. And still, there is no potable water in Flint. And predatory lenders can get away with offering subprime loans to Black and Latino borrowers, even when they have credit scores comparable to white borrowers, who are being offered more conventional, less risky loans, just to name a few recent examples. But if you don't know those stories, you don't understand what those affected are talking about. Social scientists tell us that those at the bottom of the hierarchy, any hierarchy, usually know more about those at the top than those at the top know about those at the bottom. And it's easy to understand why. The maid that cleans her employer's house will know a lot more about the employer's life than the employer is likely to know about hers. She sees the inside of that house and every room in it. But it is entirely possible that the employer has never been to her house or visited her neighborhood and may not know much about the maid's life away from her job. When we don't know the stories of those at the bottom of the hierarchy, our knowledge is incomplete. Not just because we don't know the stories of those at the bottom. It's incomplete because if we don't know the stories at the bottom, we can't truly know the stories of those at the top, because the stories are linked. Consider, for example, the story of Georgetown University, a very prestigious college located in Washington, D.C. Some of you might want to go there. In a very tangible way, those at the bottom of the hierarchy made it possible for those at the top to be educated at Georgetown. Founded in 1789, it's the oldest Catholic and Jesuit institution of higher education in the United States. In 1838, facing financial ruin, the priests in charge of Georgetown paid the school's debts by selling 272 of the slaves they owned, netting $115,000, or what would be $3.3 million in today's currency. Rachel Swarns of the New York Times vividly described what happened in an article she wrote, saying, "The human cargo was loaded on ships at a bustling wharf in the nation's capital, destined for the plantations of the Deep South. Some slaves pleaded for rosaries as they were rounded up, praying for deliverance. But on this day, in the fall of 1838, no one was spared. Not the 2-month-old baby and her mother, not the field hands, not the shoemaker, and not Cornelius Hawkins, who was about 13 years old when he was forced on board. Their panic and desperation would be mostly forgotten for more than a century. But this was no ordinary slave sale. The enslaved African Americans had belonged to the nation's most prominent Jesuit priests, and they were sold, along with scores of others, to help secure the future of the premier Catholic institution of higher learning at the time, known today as Georgetown University. The university itself owes its existence to this history, said Adam Rothman, a historian at Georgetown and a member of a university working group that is studying ways for the institution to acknowledge and try to make amends for its tangled roots in slavery. We could call Georgetown another beautiful bell, but the injustice of slavery and the sacrifice of 272 pleading human beings is certainly baked in. How can a bell like that be fixed? Well, on September 1st, 2016, the president of Georgetown University, Dr. John DeGioia, formally apologized, stating, "There is a moral as well as a practical imperative that defines this moment, that shapes the responsibility we all share. How do we address now, in this moment, the enduring and persistent legacy of slavery? I believe," he said, "the most appropriate ways for us to redress the participation of our predecessors in the institution of slavery is to address the manifestations of the legacy of slavery in our time." Some of the efforts that we began in February 2016, a Department of African American Studies, a new center focused on racial justice, and hiring of new faculty support this work, are means of engaging this challenge. He went on to say that other steps the university is taking, including the renaming of buildings, one to be called Isaac Hall, the first name on the list of those that were sold, as well as giving admissions preference to descendants of the enslaved people the Jesuits owned, as well as to build a public memorial to honor their memory. These actions are among several recommendations made by a Georgetown committee called the Working Group of Slavery, Memory, and Reconciliation. That is one example. But how can we fix this American bell we call the United States? Certainly efforts have been made in my lifetime. I have seen some progress. My father was born in 1926. He was 90 when he died last year. He was fortunate to have grown up in a family of educators and was able to attend college in the 1940s, a time when that was very uncommon for an African American. He earned his undergraduate degree at Howard University, a historically black college in Washington, and then a master's degree at the University of Iowa, and became a college professor, first teaching at Florida A&M in Tallahassee and Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, both also historically black colleges, before moving to Massachusetts in 1958, where he became the first African American professor at Bridgewater State College, now known as Bridgewater State University. I was born in 1954 when my father was still teaching art at Florida A&M. And as I mentioned, he earned his master's degree at the University of Iowa, and at that time he wanted to get his PhD in art education. Florida State University, which is also in Tallahassee, had a graduate program in art education, and it would have been very convenient to attend since it was in the same city where he lived. Unfortunately, because of the segregation of universities in Florida in 1954, my father was not allowed to attend Florida State. But because of the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling, the state of Florida was legally required to give my father access to graduate education. The state of Florida met their obligation, not by admitting him to the school across town, but by paying his transportation to Pennsylvania, where he enrolled in the art education program at Penn State and earned his doctorate there. Today, we see the foolishness of the state of Florida. Instead of trying to keep talented people like my dad in the state, their behavior drove them out. Florida's loss was Massachusetts' gain. My dad had a wonderful 30-year teaching career at Bridgewater State, free of many of the constraints of racial segregation. Today, I can say that when I applied to graduate school, I did not have the limited choices my father had. My sons, who attended Williston, went to the schools of their choice without concerns of racial segregation of the kind that my father had. But I will tell you that when my sons became old enough to drive in Northampton, their dad and I both talked to them about the hazards of being stopped by police and the importance of keeping your hands visible at all times. Because even well-behaved, good-looking, articulate, and Williston-educated young black men living in Massachusetts could fall victim to the racist assumptions of others. And unconscious bias is dangerous when someone has a gun in their hands. Yes, in my lifetime, there has been progress. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The moral arc of the universe bends towards justice." And in my lifetime, I have seen it bend. But lately, it seems that the arc is stuck. Progress of any kind is rarely linear. It's often a matter of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Periods of progressive reform are often met by backlash, as others, perhaps fearful of what is unfamiliar, try to return to an earlier status quo. And there are many examples in the history of that pattern. If we are paying attention, we can see that pattern in motion right now. In fact, I sometimes feel like we are living in the 21st century version of Reconstruction. In case you don't remember, following the end of the Civil War, there was a period of reformation in the South that included the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureaus. Blacks were given the right to vote, and in that time period, some were elected to Southern state governments. Many social reforms, including the establishment of public schools, were instituted during that period. However, there was also massive white resistance from the former Confederates, which became violent with the rise of the KKK. And as Northern law enforcers eventually withdrew from the South, marking the end of Reconstruction, white supremacists reasserted control and, quote, took the South back through the institution of Jim Crow laws and the disenfranchisement of black voters. And it was actually during that period that most of today's Confederate statues were erected, an effort to demonstrate who was in control in the South, who was back in control. Though as a nation, I believe we've moved far beyond that period in our history, I see the logic of legal expert Michelle Alexander's argument that mass incarceration is a new way to exert racialized social control, which she calls the new Jim Crow. And I watch with alarm the systematic institution of voter ID laws, not just in the South, but across the nation, clearly intended to suppress the voting behavior of historically marginalized voters. It's a tactic rooted in our history, and we should pay attention to it. We are at a moment, an important historical moment with regard to our nation's legacy of dealing with race, and it's a moment that contains both dangers and opportunities. As a psychologist, one thing I know for sure is that leadership matters. We're at a moment when leadership matters. Fundamentally, we know that human beings are not that different from other social animals. Not unlike wolves, we follow the leader. Yes, we have an innate tendency to think in us and them categories, but we look to the leader to help us know who the us is and who the them is. The leader can define who is in and who is out. The leader can draw the circle narrowly or widely. When the leader draws the circle in an exclusionary way, with the rhetoric of hostility, the sense of threat among the followers is heightened. When the rhetoric is expansive and inclusionary, the threat is reduced. It sounds simple, but we know it's not. And I want to emphasize this point because when I talk about leaders, I'm not just talking about leaders of a nation or leaders of a town, leaders of a school. Each one of you has the capacity to be a leader and to make a choice as to how you draw that circle, whether you draw it inclusively or exclusively. The leader has to ask the question, how's the circle being drawn? Who's inside it? Who's outside it? What can I do to make the circle bigger? We live in a time when anxiety and fear are rising, and us-them lines are being drawn in a way that does not bode well for the health of our society. As Martin Luther King once said, we are caught in a web of mutuality, and that means we have to know the stories at the bottom of our society as well as at the top. We need a much wider perspective, seeking out the stories, the histories we don't know. And each of us, everyone here, has the opportunity to broaden our perspective. And a learning environment like this one is a good place to start. Last year, while I was working on the new edition of my book, I traveled to Texas, speaking on the campus of Texas A&M. And something there happened that gave me some hope, and I want to end my talk by telling you about it. A group of black teenagers from a high school in Houston were touring the campus. And during the tour, they were approached by a small group of Texas A&M students who yelled racial slurs at them. And you might say, what's hopeful about that? And I would tell you nothing. But what gave me hope is what happened next. The student body president, a young white man named Joseph Benino, class of 2016, issued a statement on YouTube, 3.5 minutes long, and if you're interested, you can find it still on YouTube. All you have to do is Google Texas A&M Student Body President, 2016. His statement was just 3.5 minutes long, but it was clear, concise, and courageous. Acknowledging that he himself had been silent in the face of racist and sexist remarks, often made behind closed doors, he recognized that his and others' silence gave permission for the hateful remarks to be made publicly. He said in his speech, "Our silence fosters hate. Our silence enables the hateful to feel comfortable and welcome." He urged his fellow students to take responsibility for making a change. I was very impressed by his statement, and as I said, you can find it yourself. His example of leadership was for me a sign of hope. Is our society getting better? It could be, but it's up to all of us to make sure that it is. I'm going to end with some advice from President Obama to the Howard University graduating class of 2016. He said to them, "Change isn't something that happens every 4 or 8 years. Change is not placing your faith in any particular politician and then just putting your feet up and saying, okay, go. Change is the effort of committed citizens who hitch their wagons to something bigger than themselves and fight for it every single day. And that's what each of us has to do every single day for lasting change to occur and for all of us to hear the sound of a beautiful bell in which we can all take pride." Thank you very much.
Dr. Tatum, thank you so much. As I said, Dr. Tatum flew up today and she's going to fly back down tomorrow to Atlanta. We're so grateful for you to having made this huge effort to come here. I hear a lot of talks. I've been around schools a long time, but President Tatum helped me hear the bell differently in her words. I can't wait to get a written copy of that because I'll read it again. But I hope you all feel as fortunate as I do, and I know the faculty behind me to have heard those really inspirational words. So thank you very much again. And so now on the program, we'll sing the alma mater as Mr. Berlanga taught us. The faculty will recess out, and then you guys will go off to your dinners, and it's going to be a great evening. So let's make Mr. Berlanga proud right now.